Toby, come on the podcast, man. We want to talk to you about this stuff. On May 6th, 2020, the market's closing bell, Ottawa-based e-commerce provider Shopify had displaced RBC as Canada's largest company by market cap. In the midst of the pandemic, it was the start of a meteoric rise. That hasn't lasted. The company's share price is back down to its pre-pandemic levels. And in the last year, Shopify has laid off first 10% and then 20% of its staff. That last deep cut coming earlier this month as it also sold off its logistics division. Hey, and it's not like the pandemic rise was a smooth ride in the first place. Since March of 2020, at least 12 senior leaders have departed the company, including 3 C-suite execs since September of last year. Many other long-time and respected leaders were let go in the most recent round of cuts. Now, this episode isn't a concern troll. It's unlikely that Canada's still largest Canadian tech company is going anywhere soon. But what comes next for Shopify is an interesting question, particularly as it approaches its 20th anniversary and 10th year as a publicly traded tech company. Helping us to answer these questions and maybe perhaps provide an informed vibe check is Madeline Stone, an e-commerce and retail reporter with Business Insider. Let's dig in. Madeline, in talking about Shopify, I think probably the easiest place to start would be talking about the part of Shopify that Shopify just got rid of, which is its logistics business. So can you maybe walk us through what that business comprised and why Shopify did that?
Right. So Shopify has been working for the last several years on building up this logistics business. It consists of a couple different parts. It made a couple of really large acquisitions over the last 4 years, the largest of which was this logistics company, Deliver, that it acquired last July for $2.1 billion. It had also acquired 6 River Systems, which is a robotics and warehouse management company, for $450 million back in 2019. In the meantime, also has been working on building up its own fulfillment network, which it had been referring to as Shopify Fulfillment Network.
So that's like a couple easy billion right there in fulfillment. I guess, why were they looking to do this, and how much of it has to do with Amazon?
So they never came out and explicitly said, this is to compete with Amazon. But I think a lot of people drew a line there with good reason. They originally got into logistics because they're in the business of providing their merchants with whatever type of software, whatever services that they need to run their business as well. And a lot of small merchants have issues and challenges when it comes to fulfilling orders. If you are a small business, you don't necessarily have access to warehouse space. You don't benefit from discounted shipping rates that larger retailers would. So I think Shopify saw this opportunity to provide its merchants with that. I think it ultimately ended up being a much larger, much more complicated and more expensive endeavor than maybe it had assumed when it started out. I think
logistics is complicated.
Yes.
It's literally the traveling salesman problem, literally.
Right. I mean, they've been in the business of software for so long. I think that is a completely different thing than, moving physical items in the real world.
But they're still helping the merchants sell stuff, physical stuff. How did the market react to that? So they did a few things at the same time. They announced layoffs and they announced the selling off of that part of the business. How did the market react? If you could disentangle that.
Yeah, the market responded really positively. The stock has been up quite a bit since that was announced. I think a lot of investors saw this foray into logistics as a distraction from what Shopify has historically been good at. It's also very expensive. They've been investing billions of dollars into this project, especially given the economic climate over the last year or so. I think branching out into this thing that's going to require even more billions of dollars was something that investors were really wary about. So the market definitely responded very positively to them saying, we're going to be turning to partners to do this instead.
Yeah, it's something that Shopify CEO Toby Lukey referred to as a side quest as well, which I think we're going to get into a little bit. But this isn't, I guess, the only vector that Shopify is playing with Amazon, right? Because you have the basic commerce, but then you have things like the Shop app. You have the buy with Prime versus like just Shop Pay circumstance here. Was your sense of this that like analysts didn't believe that this was one of the battlefronts that Shopify could maybe compete with Amazon on when it comes to like experience or CapEx or things like that? Or like, would they prefer them to continue to be competing in other venues? Or was it just like, this is way too much of a hassle, it's way too much work to be investing in this?
We invested in a software company.
Yeah, side quest. Yeah, 100%.
First, on the side quest, I thought that wording was really interesting because that was the first time I had really heard them use that terminology before. And I'm not sure that investors really were viewing it as a side quest. I think they were taking the effort really seriously before that. And I think opinions really ranged on whether it was feasible. I think some were optimistic that, maybe it wouldn't really reach the full scale that Amazon is at, but at least they could offer an alternative.
Now, I think with this, we talked about the financial earnings. We were saying, so as part of these announcements, they sold off these components of the business. They made some layoffs, which we're definitely going to get to. But they also posted a 25% revenue increase up to $1.5 billion. I think it's probably worthwhile talking a bit about like, because there's a lot of negative things that have happened to Shopify in the past a little bit compared to the pandemic, but just the actual product itself, right? Like, Rob, you're a product guy. Beyond the logistics stuff, like this is still the best platform and tool for independent entrepreneurs to kind of build a e-commerce business.
I mean, it's truly amazing. I'm helping out a startup in Atlantic, Canada at the moment. And this is a legit Shopify store. So not just like me selling hats or something like that. They're like, they're selling quite a bit of stuff.
RobHats.com is no more?
No, that's because Robcoin was the only type of currency you could use.
Yeah. It's been a tough market out there for everybody.
Whoops, shouldn't have done the crypto. Anyway, but yeah, no, the product is quite fantastic from what I can see. You basically have like effectively a CRM. So you've got like the shop where you sell the stuff. But if you look at the back end of the tooling there, notwithstanding the logistics side of things, you've got effectively a CRM. You've got like marketing tooling where you can be like, oh, if customer put things in cart, then they didn't do anything for 2 weeks, email them. And there's like a visual programming tool, which is quite sophisticated. They even had a cohort analysis. So for those nerds who are product people, you can be like, who came in on what month and when did they buy and did they come back and that kind of stuff.
Cohort nerds, we see you.
So like just that level of sophistication is beyond what I think most normal day-to-day merchants would be even thinking. This particular merchant didn't even know what that was, but it's a pretty powerful tool. So the backend is quite a sophisticated system. You really could run your entire show up to and this is not even Shopify Plus. It's just regular Shopify with great analytics and great metrics that you could spend a whole bunch of your life doing without even worrying about logistics. So as a product, it's quite impressive.
Okay. Madeline, do you feel like any of that were like investor response that you were tracking? And we saw the share price bump a little bit after the news, which is weird when you say we're laying off 1/5 of our company and getting out of a business unit and see the share price bump up a little bit. But whether or not this was a side quest or a distraction, it seems like the response is a positive one towards focusing on that main quest, which is like what Rob's talking about. It's like a really helpful tool to make commerce possible for people who aren't logistics or cohort analysis, product heads, things like that.
Yeah, I think investors definitely view Shopify as the leader in this space by a lot. I think, as you said, the product is really good. It works really well, and they've shown a lot of dedication to continue to improving that product and also continuing to launch new tools that merchants can use if they need help with other areas of their business, like getting into cross-border commerce, helping with sales tax and tracking expenses and all these kind of complicated things that merchants encounter on a daily basis.
I guess that for me, part of the confusion is it's like, okay, well, if you really want to own the commerce stack, you need to do all the things. And it is interesting that, and I think we're going to get to it later when we talk about the juxtaposition of how Canadians and how the different markets think about different businesses. But it's like, it'd be a hell of a lot easier if I didn't have to think about logistics. So the fact that it is quote unquote side quest seems a bit strange. And I know that from your work that there's even the investors were not quite on agreement whether it is something that is actually fundamental to their business or not. But one of the things that has come up, I think, is about Prime, right? So Amazon's claim to fame is one click purchase and the subscription of Prime, which gets you a bunch of stuff aside from the video service and quick shipping. It gets you things very quickly.
A lot of animated D&D shows I've been watching through Prime, just full disclosure.
That's its primary purpose. The secondary purpose is to buy stuff. So how do you juxtapose that sort of unique thing that, because Shopify stores are sort of disparate, right? I set up a store. There's really no like Amazon for Shopify. Shopify's in the background. There's no curated store where you can go look at all the Shopify stores, although they've toyed with that idea over the years.
They have the shop app, but it's not a full on Amazon.
It's not a full marketplace like Amazon is trying to be. And so Prime is their sticky for Amazon because it's across all the things. And I know that they've been talking, you've written about the fact that they've been talking about Prime and how that factors in paying with Prime in Shopify land. How does that even work? And does that it's kind of a confusing thing. I'm shopping on a Shopify store and I can pay with Prime. What's that all about?
Yeah, so Amazon just recently, I think just the beginning of this year, made it widely available to anyone who wants to use it. They launched this new product called Buy with Prime, which is basically, it manifests as a little badge that shows up on online sellers' website that says Buy with Prime, which means you can check out as a Prime member, meaning you can use all your stored payment information. You can get the quick shipping that you get with Amazon Prime, so 2-day, 1-day, same day sometimes. So what has happened with this is that Amazon has made it available to anyone who wants to install it on their website. If you are a Shopify merchant and go to try to install Buy with Prime as a checkout option, you will get a pop-up warning that says this is not a supported checkout gateway. You're leaving yourself vulnerable to fraud if you do this.
Might be violating your own terms of services as well, as we've noted on past podcasts.
Exactly. So there's obviously some things that they need to work out there. I think both sides are saying that they're amenable to coming to some sort of deal. However, it's I think a little bit tricky to figure out what they may be getting.
It's weird though, because like Shop has Shop Pay, and aren't you just putting your competitors like, here, look, you're probably an Amazon customer too. So like, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure how many merchants cross-pollinate where they're in the Amazon marketplace as well as having their own Shopify stores. But isn't it kind of weird to be like, you probably shop on Amazon, so here's a big fat payment thing.
Well, isn't it? But it's down. I think that's the point, though. It's down to the merchant decision, where the merchant wants to put every button possible there to make sure that they transact.
They can sell.
And Shopify doesn't
want to stop that, but it's also
they don't necessarily have the capacity to stop it. And to your point, because they don't have a full marketplace that they own, they can't fully dictate the terms of like if anyone's been on Amazon in a while, you might recognize that it looks exactly the same as Amazon did in like 1997. Like they fully control that experience. They can do whatever. Shopify's in some places, supporting the front facing storefront, but it's really the back end power that is helping those merchants and entrepreneurs you were talking about. They don't necessarily have the capacity to control what buttons those merchants put on, which is why I think they're, are you sure you trust Amazon with your data? You might be violating terms of services here. Like, I think the merchant incentive is to have whatever button the consumer is going to click.
Don't make it hard to sell.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
Like, that's the merchant.
Maybe, Madeline, to tie this together, we were just talking about Shopify moving away from one point of competition with Amazon, maybe to help them focus. That doesn't seem like it's stopping Amazon from encroaching in on the things that Shopify does well, right? Like, I guess how much bigger of a deal is it that Amazon's moving in on Shopify's turf than it is that Shopify's moving out of Amazon's logistical turf?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The analysts have been making some estimates that Buy with Prime could really hurt Shopify, even if they do not create this official gateway for them to be a supported checkout. I think there is a way that they could come to an agreement to make it work for both of them. Like if they decide to split revenue or something. But I mean, Shopify doesn't need to be making this kind of agreement. If they do so, like, they risk losing a lot of payments revenue and data that they really need and that merchants need in order to be targeting the shoppers.
The interesting pattern that you've pointed out, aside from the fact is Shopify a financial services company or an e-com? Anyway, but we can put that aside for just a second. It's like analysts are cranky because they're in the logistics business. Analysts are cranky. So basically, anytime they touch Amazon in any way, shape, or form, everyone freaks out. It seems like the pattern. Is that pretty much accurate? Because everyone's scared of Amazon.
I think that's true.
Based upon our numbers, when we write about Shopify versus Amazon components, we definitely see the most interest because that's the Shopify. While they might not name Amazon that often, they talk about this all the time. They talk about arming the rebels. They talk about, like, there is one centralized force for commerce. Is that a force for good or evil? And we have this rebel alliance of everyone else who maybe doesn't want to be beholden to one storefront. I think it's interesting is like, because they're around this massive island of commerce, it's really tough for them to find some point of ingress, some place that they can play in that either doesn't immediately fight against Amazon or that Amazon might want to counterpunch with. Yeah. Like, we've seen this before when, they had a couple of years back, they got in a real big fight with MailChimp over who owns the relationship with the customer for this mail system that's also engaged with the commerce system. Right. I think they eventually kissed and made up, and then Shopify made an investment in Klaviyo, I believe, which is a direct competitor. On the logistics side, it's obviously a little bit more directly connected. And I would say on the payment side, that's like Rob, like, if you are in a business where you are dealing with a large cohort of different merchants who have their own customer engagements, you want to be that first button press, right? 100%. You want to, that's like basic top of the funnel. And then you want to try and
there's a reason why Apple is now a financial services company and
launching credit cards and
everything's
like
a financial services company. Does it make sense now to switch over, like, as we've talked about the business and where Shopify is decoupling bits of business to, like, the employee side of things?
Oh yeah.
That little thing that also is co-announced at the same time. Yeah,
let's talk about employee sentiment. Because Madeline, you ran a story, I think, a week before the Shopify's early May announcement of the layoffs, basically saying that employees were kind of bracing for additional layoffs. There had been some signals sent through. I know we had heard some things in terms of, like, travel was being stopped. A couple of all-hand regularly scheduled meetings were being slowed down, things like this. Everyone, everyone's getting in their Slack channel, maybe whispering. Do you want to maybe take us through that anticipation and then maybe we can kind of compare notes on what the reaction has been since 1/5 of the company's been completely eliminated? Like, what was the vibe a week before the company announced that they were getting rid of 20% of their employees?
I think similar to what you said, I was also hearing about a week before they ended up announcing it, that the meetings being canceled, offsites being canceled, were really raising red flags. And then the earnings call being moved up to be before the bell. I think they moved it up on Monday, and the earnings call was set to take place on Thursday. It was initially supposed to be taking place after the bell. That really freaked people out, and everyone was thinking that something big was definitely going to happen.
You don't usually move it up for good news, right?
I mean, this is the second layoff, right? They did the 10%
a year ago, July
something like
2022.
That. So was there like the sort of Damocles kind of thing? Because I mean, anyone in the tech sector was like, oh, well, okay, Google, year of austerity or whatever, or Facebook, whoever said it was the year of...
I think it was Facebook, Google, and Meta, and Microsoft.
I think it was Zuck who's like, it's the year of something, the year of lean or something like that. So was it that much of a surprise? Were people, I'm looking at both of you, were people like 10%, this isn't it? Or were they like, no, we're fine because we're crafters?
Madeline, you are our guest. I will let you go first, but also because you've been tracking a lot of employee sentiment stories over the last 2 years with, like, sports team versus family, like Toby saying basically, like, we are as a business, we are not a family, we're a sports team. We have to be aligned to certain things. I'll let you kind of maybe connect that before I weigh in with any hot takes.
From what I had heard from people, the layoffs from last year, July, that really broke a layer of trust for a lot of people. Shopify was a place that people really tended to stick around, for people who had been working there, 5, 6, 7 years. And the company had never really done a big layoff like that before. So once that kind of came down, I think the feeling inside the company really changed. There's a lot of talk among people in support, like they're outsourcing more of the customer support staff to people overseas. That was really worrying people. They were also redoing how they evaluated performance and pushing new guidance around how many people were going to be graded positively and how many were not going to be graded positively. I think there was also, as you were saying about, Meta with the year of efficiency, I think that was also happening inside efficiency. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
That was also happening inside Shopify. Earlier this year, they announced this project they called Chaos Monkey, which was, deleting all meetings that were more than 2 people, no meetings on Wednesdays. Also getting people off of Slack. They could only chat on Workplace by Meta. It felt to people like they were kind of shutting down some communication levels that were there before. So yeah, definitely a change in vibe over the last year.
Do you think, as a Canadian, anecdotally, I can't help but bump into Shopify people, Shopifolk, I think is what they call themselves, where you're like, yeah, totally. The craft of building is the thing that matters, and everything else is as equates with sort of no better than janitorial services. So like the thing that you've both reported on in the last month or so has been the distinction between a manager and a crafter, technically elevating the craft and not so much elevating the manager stuff.
If we want to go there, we can go there. I just want to follow up on something Madeline said first in terms of the trust battery component, because that's really interesting, because I think some of the things that she's been tracking extend back beyond the past year, but we've seen even pre-pandemic leading into the pandemic. There was a lot of employee resource groups that were kind of shut down. Their prior layoffs that they had made were for people who had been maybe, there was a culture of openness at Shopify, and there's a lot of criticisms around decisions being made. Maybe I think we've noted before certain employee training videos, conversations related to like hosting like the Breitbart store, things like that. They did also move away from Slack to I think Facebook's business management tool, which really not only changed the way that the leadership team engaged with employees, but it eliminated the spaces, the dedicated channels that were available for employees to really talk to each other. So this has been a long-standing transition away from like what the culture of Shopify is, what Shopify cares about, maybe what the employees care about versus what the leadership team cares about. And we should talk a little bit about how much the leadership team has changed. But Madeline made this point about the trust difference. I was going to talk about this later, but I think I should know. We ran a story in June of last year, right after a town hall. We were working on a prior story noting that during the summer of last year, there was a lot of new applicants, new hires at Shopify who were really concerned because the company had been dragging their heels on submitting the offers. The statement at the time was because Shopify was undergoing a change to their compensation system, and they kind of needed to like get that set up before they added these new people on their offers. But it was also indicated in a town hall that we reported on that hiring at the company would be slowing, and that initial goal of like, I think they wanted 2023 new engineers.
This is not 420.
2021 engineers hired. Like that wasn't going to be the same pace. Toby Shannon reportedly told employees to kind of like gird their loins for the coming changes. The immediate response that we got following that story was pretty negative from Shopify employees who thought maybe we were taking the statements made at the town hall out of context, that it wasn't that dramatic. It was more of a like, yeah, we're not going to hire at the rocket ship levels of like 2020, 2021. We don't need to anymore. But, things are changing. Prepare for this. And then I know that there were some comments internally when we ran that story from the senior leadership team, basically saying whoever talked to BetaKit should just like get out of this company. Like if you are leaking these things to people, to publications, like if you're not part of the team, get out of the company. And then a month later, they laid off 10% of the company. And by the end of the year, Toby Shannon was out of the company. So I think, Madeline, to your point there, that trust differential was a little bit because it seemed slightly unexpected up until that point based upon what the company was communicating. I've heard other things. I've heard relative to last year's layoffs, this one has hit obviously harder, more significant, but there's a greater uncertainty there simply because for however they were communicating things up until that point, I think Shopify got a lot of credit for the way that they announced those layoffs. Toby Lukey, the CEO, really leaned in and said, hey, we really made a big bet on the pandemic. We thought that the growth that we were seeing during this period was going to continue. That's on me. We're going to need to scale back to, where growth was projecting pre-pandemic, but that's just the nature of it. And at least some employees that I've talked to thought that, well, this is a tough pill to swallow, but it makes sense. We should get into the manager versus crafter stuff. But I think the communication coming out of this set of layoffs has rubbed more people the wrong way because it seems to be caught up in not only the move away from logistics, but the way that Shopify completely overhauled how they label employees within their company just like 6 weeks ago prior to making these layoffs. Madeline, do you want to talk a little bit about the manager crafter dynamic and if anybody that you've been speaking to either at the company or no longer at the company, like what the vibe check has been around that?
Yeah, I think the manager versus crafter thing was interesting. It was framed as a way to have individual contributors be rewarded for progressing as an individual contributor without wanting to become a manager and moving up that track and getting compensated the same way a manager would. And I thought that
Makers
was
will
really
be freed from the shackles of managing people so that they can do what they do best, right?
Right. Very positive framing. When I asked the company when I was writing about this announcement, whether that meant there would be fewer managers overall, if that was the goal, they said, yes, we expect there will be fewer managers. And I have been hearing with these layoffs that a lot of managers and leads were affected and laid off in this latest round. So it's plausible that this, new categorization was a way to, eliminate extra layers of bureaucracy that they may have acquired as they've hired so many people during the pandemic.
Yeah. So there's a lot here. And I think we should note maybe off the top that the company said that themselves as part of the announcements of the most recent layoffs. I think they posted that letter from Toby publicly. And they basically said that Shopify thinks of itself as a crafter-centric vocational company. And they said related to the management and crafter tracks, our numbers were unhealthy, just like it is in much of the tech industry. One of the insidious consequences of this is that it leads to the company increasingly celebrating activities rather than crafter-driven outcomes. And we can dig into like what they consider crafters to be. But yeah, like they kind of explicitly came out and said that there was an imbalance between these two groups. Now, I think, Madeline, to your point, when they initially made the announcement, if they're changing the way that employees identify, obviously it's with the intention to flatten some of that. I think we had reported previously that the goal was if you're going to be a manager, you need a minimum of 4 direct reports because I think there were some people that might have been managing smaller groups that were managing groups or things like that. And then what I've heard is that the intention was to get that maybe up to 10. So people who really wanted to be managers would be managers. And then people who were maybe more career driven towards building things would not have to have those direct reports that you can kind of collect as you grow in seniority. However, we have also heard that like a significant number of the managers at the company were let go, like a disproportionate number as part of this group. But more specifically, This is coming just after 6 weeks of the company creating that distinction within the business. So they set up this opportunity whereby they're saying, hey, we want people to not have their compensation dependent upon how many people they manage. And we want managers to have their own track based upon how excellent of managers they are. Everyone sort themselves into 2 groups, make a decision, go forward. And I think they were offering like programming and training for people if you wanted to transition out and you were going from maybe team lead or whatever, and you wanted to become like full on crafter, let's find a place for you within that company. That was 6 weeks ago. There were people that were laid off that were either managers making a transition or exploring their opportunities that had just basically identified themselves with this, that didn't have that opportunity. And one of the things I was struck by when we reported on this initially, Madeline, I don't know if you heard the same thing, is that we talked to a bunch of like leadership, management, HR experts, and they were kind of like, oh, these distinctions and these dual tracks are pretty common within tech. We're actually surprised that Shopify has taken so long to make this change. They kind of saw it as a innocuous thing that Shopify was catching up to. We heard from some employees that they were concerned that given prior statements from the leadership team, this could be a bit of a scarlet letter situation because leadership didn't value those 2 different distinctions equally. Yeah. And then here we are 6 weeks later, you have the leadership saying things like, we're crafter centric. The number of managers that we had that we just identified were unhealthy. You even have Harley Finkelstein, the president, talking about this is going to mean, or this is going to lead to, going to have less scope creep, fewer meetings. We're going to have more shipping, great features to merchants. This is going to they really leaned into, we made our choice on who we want to keep, but they did that 6 weeks after telling their employees, hey, you have 2 choices at this company for what you want to do.
Don't pick the wrong one.
So it's, to tie this all back, Madeline, it's interesting that you really were hearing that the last round of layoffs, the trusts were low, because I think this one is a little bit messier in terms of what's been communicated, what the focus was on, how shareholders are responding to the renewed focus. And then you just have, 20% of the company being told that they're going a certain way, only to find out that they're not part of the plan. I don't know, Madeline, does that resonate with people that you've spoken to, or maybe kind of some of the response in this, I guess, short week since the layoffs have happened?
Yeah, and I think another aspect is that 20% is a huge number of people. We're talking over 2,000 people. So, I mean, I think the 10% was shocking just because it was the first one, but 20%, that's much bigger than a lot of these other big tech companies.
Yeah, and effectively 3,000 employees in the last year, if you're really looking at it, right? I think you've also reported, Madeline, that there were a couple, like layoffs were continuing that weren't being announced fulsomely in groups. So like,
it's not a bucket.
It's
an ongoing. Yeah. So I'm curious because, I mean, don't forget it. Amazon, if you are comparing quote unquote like for like, if there's such a thing, Amazon laid off a significant number of people,
like 90,000 employees.
Yeah, some ridiculous number. I mean, yes, they have the fulfillment centers, which have a lot of human beings in them, although they still need those. But I'm curious to get your take, especially Madeline. Like you're in the States. You're looking into Canada, but you're surrounded by big tech in the States, which is, we're all going through this sort of like reckoning. And this being my 3rd recession in my career, is this just like tech companies becoming real companies? Are we wringing our hands in a particularly unfair way about it? Or is this just biggest company in Canada laying off some people? This is just now what the business world is like. Is that how are you seeing it differently than that?
I do see them as being part of this larger trend. I think every major tech company has laid off a huge amounts of people this year. Let me think. It's interesting what you're saying about as far as like it being Canadian versus US. I hadn't really thought about it in that way. I know.
Or even without that distinction, does it feel different in any way? If you look at Google, you look at Shopify, you look at Amazon, you look at Facebook. Are they all like, yeah, it's the bucket of stuff, and there's no distinction between who cares what the country it's in? It's just, oh yeah, another tech company laying people off, and that's just the new normal.
Oof, I think the cynical part of me, I mean, it is kind of what's been going on. I think the part that made this so dramatic was the logistics exit, and I think it's also important to remember that like 20% is in addition to the people who are leaving the company because of the logistics sale. So it's even more than that. Yeah.
It's entangled in it. Yeah. It's not clear. The distinction isn't clear when you read the long story. It's not, the 20% is distinct from.
And I think we should note here that a lot of the people that were members of that logistics team have been given the option or provided offers to kind of move along here, right? So it isn't a full kind of bloodletting. There is some transition here. And I think Shopify is still going to own a percentage in the company that they sold the logistics to, right? So you could see this as, hey, we know this is important. We don't need to take on the burden and the expenditure ourselves. We can still own a stake in this thing that will be important for us going forward. My friends, let's cut to the chase. You're a founder, an entrepreneur, you're hungry, you're fast, you're agile, and you need a legal eagle that matches your pace. The answer? This episode's sponsor, Good Lawyer. Now, this isn't your grandpa's law firm. Good Lawyer is the trusted legal partner of thousands of businesses nationwide, boasting fixed-fee legal projects and their revolutionary fractional general counsel. And look, I'm no lawyer. I can't tell you what tort law means, only that it sounds delicious. But when BetaKit found itself in a labyrinth of legalities, Good Lawyer stepped in, delivering results that were as efficient as they were cost-effective. Plus, Good Lawyer's fractional general counsel isn't just versed in the law, they become versed in your business. They stand in the trenches with you, offering practical legal advice that fuels your momentum. So visit goodlawyer.ca today to see for yourself and tell them that BetaKit sent you. For me, the thing that stands out beyond the cuts, which percentage-wise are significant, whether, in terms of like mass numbers, nowhere in comparison to like the FANG companies, is the comments coming from the leadership team about why they're happening. I also know that part of what rubs employees the wrong way a bit with these is having their part of their mission that they thought was the main quest for the business being suddenly referred to as a side quest. Shopify and Toby have I think they sponsor a StarCraft 2 team and stuff like that. Like they have some millennial video game language that finds its way into their corporate speak. But I also think it refers to, sometimes how they see employees and how they value employees. Like executive assistants at this company are referred to as expansion packs, which is like a fun video game term. If anyone remembers like the 32X, or like we can just talk about 90s video game systems. But it also means that you as an employee, your only value is how you plug into the senior leader that you're supporting, right? I think, again, creating this distinction by saying we have managers and we have crafters, and then shortly later saying we have way too many managers here. It's unhealthy for the business. It's unhealthy for the tech industry. I think regardless of where Shopify is on the scale of all the FANG companies and what they're doing, we should be paying attention to what the senior leadership team is communicating and what they care about, particularly given, I think as we've both noted in some of these reports, they've had a complete overhaul of the senior leadership team, barring Harley and Toby, over the last 2 years. We've had 3 C-suite execs gone since September. There's been about, when we last reported on this, I think we said somewhere between like 12 and 15 like senior leadership positions. We could go over them all. I think there's a couple other senior leaders that have departed as part of these last layoffs. For me, the thing that stands out that's worthy of note from a North American kind of standpoint is like what Toby and Harley think is the best way to run a tech company, and maybe where those ideas are coming from, how they're being reinforced, and if it's a signal that other tech companies, large and small, are going to adopt. And maybe Madeline, I'll throw back to you here. Like what from has been communicated from the leadership team resonates with you in terms of what you're seeing other companies in North America, retail, e-commerce, or otherwise, kind of communicating about this?
You mean about the layoffs?
Layoffs, downturn, like what businesses need to do now to deal with the reality of 2023? Like, was there anything about what Toby or Harley or anyone else has communicated that is surprising or contradictory or stands out relative to what some of the larger companies are doing? Like, and we can even just say like relative to Amazon and the massive layoffs that they just made.
I do think that letter from Toby they published in the morning before earnings, it didn't really make reference to the economic climate at all. It was more about this distinction between side quest and main quest, which, as you mentioned, is really a very unique way of talking about these things. Whereas most of the other big tech companies, you see them talking about the macroeconomic conditions and saying this is kind of out of our hands and there's too much uncertainty.
Do you think, like, what's interesting about Shopify, there's not very many tech companies that are founder-led still. Shopify is, Meta is, Google is not, Amazon, by coincidence, Bezos quit, and then Andy Jassy took over, and then all of a sudden they had to do layoffs.
Yeah, timing is everything, man.
Just, it is interesting the fact that this is a founder-led company, and you're talking about the executive shuffle over the last couple of years. Do you think that has... How does that factor in, or is that just a, hey, look, executive shuffling? Does that just...
Well, let's add on to that because, Madeline was just making a really great point. Like when the last layoffs happened, we talked about it earlier, Toby was roundly applauded for owning the fact that the company had made a bet and the macroeconomic conditions had changed.
Yes.
And he was taking ownership of making that decision, but also, not tilting in windmills and understanding like the market in 2022 was different than the market in 2020 when their share price and their revenue was skyrocketing. This announcement communicated two things. This thing we're getting rid of isn't primary to our mission. It's a side quest. We don't actually care about this. And we have a cultural problem at our company with who we've hired and what they're focused on. It's not macroeconomic at all. It's entirely existential, right? Like,
fascinating point.
I don't think we've seen other companies right now talking significantly about the existential crises or challenges that they're facing. Like nothing from the Amazon statement said anything close to that.
And I think you referred to that before when you were saying that Toby was widely praised for how he handled the first round of layoffs. I think people really respect him as far as taking personal responsibility, and I think that happened a little bit here too. I think a little bit less. I think the first time it was very much like this was my call to make, and I messed it up. He didn't use those exact terms here, but yeah, referring more to the decisions that they made than factors out of their control.
Yeah, he was close to that language, if not exact that. I think there was a definitely sense of ownership of the initial decision and the decision to have to pull back at least. This one just seems so much more externally focused on the people that they hired that are working for them, what they were told to do. And obviously, like you said, as a company, you set a direction, you staff towards that vision, and then you have to kind of read and react and be responsive to it. Like, I think we need to be really fair here in terms of every business undergoes that. Like, yeah, we did hire some people to do this thing, and then we realized that's not the thing we should be doing. That's got to change. I just think part of, Madeline, back to your previous point about like the trust battery and levels of trust, I think this one, it seems more like a commentary on not even just like in the short term people hired during the pandemic, but some long-standing employees at this company who were just told that like, not only were they working on things that weren't of import, but they're also being told that like their core competency as a manager is unhealthy within the business.
Have you heard, like, how are you hearing? So if you accrue what's happened over the last couple of years and what you're saying about how it happens and the fact that it's happened over time and people are self-selecting into the wrong group, are you hearing, Madeline, anything about employee? Does this stop being a mission and start becoming a job or anything like that? Or has any sentiment fundamentally changed in the humans that work there?
Who's sliding into your DMs right now, Madeline? Like, other than us asking you to be on the podcast, like what's going on?
It's literally just us.
I think, like I said before, I think the spell has kind of broken for a lot of people. I think people are still very passionate about the mission. I mean, if they still have a job.
Does it change the calculus? I mean, those who are there, who obviously are there for, comp is probably not terrible, and they're obviously mission driven. The company's a mission driven business. The question is, now it's a company, a public company. It's acting like a normal company.
Yes.
And then does that change the calculus about why people are there or what they're looking for? Or
a year away from its 20th anniversary and 2 years away from 10 years as a publicly traded company, right? This isn't a startup anymore.
Right. So just curious to know whether that the spell has been broken. What does that mean in terms of activities for those humans, or is it yet to be seen?
Yeah, I think more bureaucracy that's been a thing for the last several years. Less open. One of the values that Shopify has is they call it default to open, which means like we default to having open conversations and sharing with each other. I think that has become less true for some people.
Again, juxtaposing that with Google. Google was don't be evil. You haven't heard that in the last 5 years, right? Or 3 years, or whatever that magic number is. And I'm not saying it's now they're like, we want to be evil. It's just clearly their values have changed, or something has changed that is not the core mission. And then is that a fair juxtaposition for Shopify?
I would agree with Madeline that the defaults to open communication, I don't think you would have many former employees or current employees there today really believe that is the case. Just given some of, and we could probably do another hour tracking the small changes over time, but we noted some of them, whether in terms of platform, again, going fully remote really changed things. Yeah. Other considerations that have happened. I think the leadership team constantly getting tired of being questioned about some of the merchants that they allow in their stores, maybe some of them even including like the marital partners of their now chief operating officer, things like that. I don't want to get into that stuff too much, but I think to back up Madeline, I think that defaults to open has really changed as a cultural priority. I don't think it's a main quest anymore, but I also, Madeline, maybe if you would like to just say, hey, Rob, read my next story and that'll tell you everything I'm hearing right now, you can also do that in fairness. Like if you just want to, if you want to tease your next story or remind everyone where they could read that, I think might give an indication there. We don't
Insider .com.
Oh
yeah, okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Maybe to wrap this up, one place that we can take this go forward, because the big question is like, this isn't we are not doing a postmortem on a dying company. We're not looking to concern troll here. But it is an important question of like, we have tracked what's led them to this moment. What is next for Shopify? Madeline, maybe I'll ask you, like, that's something you can speak to either in terms of how you anticipate them moving through the rest of the year, maybe what analysts are looking for, things that you'll be paying attention to. And then Rob and I can do maybe 2 or 3 minutes on the Canada versus US tall poppy stuff that you don't have to participate in any way because it's only of interest to
sausage making.
Yeah, just solipsistic Canadians who are very happy right now watching a BlackBerry movie about the last Canadian tech giant completely falling apart. But like, what are you going to be paying attention to? What are you going to be tracking going forward about Shopify? What do you think is next for this company?
Yeah, I think Shopify is doing really well still. I think it has a bright future ahead of it. I think we'll see it return to some of the things that it's really good at. They've been talking a lot about their audiences product. So I'm not sure if maybe they'll be getting more into advertising. That could be an area where they're going to expand more. Obviously, payments and Shop Pay are a huge area of growth for them. I think they'll continue these kinds of products that reinforce their consumer-facing brand. So we'll see if the Shop app gets more users and launches more services on that app to build up with shoppers. Like this is how you could shop from Shopify brands, and this is who we are as a company.
Yeah. Any thoughts in terms of like what they might emphasize going forward? Like just tying it back to that conversation of like
no physical, all digital.
Yeah, the tendrils here. The advertising thing is really interesting. Like obviously they have been trying to build this Trojan horse shop app to build at least like an Amazon for shop merchants. At maybe the same time, like some of these shop merchants might also be Amazon merchants. Is there any, if you were to place a bet on where that focus would be throughout the year, where would you be betting on?
Of those three,
or if you got a dark horse candidate, we'd love to hear it for sure. If you think they're going to like pivot to video or do some TikTok dancing stuff.
Yeah, I think payments is still the biggest thing for them. I mean, that's where most of their revenue growth has come from. They're doing, like, Shop Pay has seen incredible growth. And I think that will be, a big focus.
Maybe one additional question we'll ask you in the wrap up here. As you've been doing this reporting, and this will maybe be the transition for us to gossip about the Canadian stuff that we care about. As you've been reporting on this stuff, have you, what has been the response from the company?
Do they respond with poop only every time?
Did you get a poop emoji response, like a automated kind of Elon style thing?
I guess we could just say, like, they have not responded to our stories publicly.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
In credit to our guest, I think that's a great transition to talk about maybe some of the stories that they've responded to publicly. So we'll, in the show notes, share a couple of tweets here from Toby Lutke in response to some of this stuff. But I think there's been, tying it back to the senior leadership team and what they care about and what they're thinking about. I think through all of this, we've seen maybe, they're really big on makers. They're really big on crafters. They're not really big on criticism. There's been, Toby has publicly come out just being like what value do market analysts provide? Which is a weird thing for like the CEO of a publicly traded company to say, because that can like move the markets a little bit. But there's also been commentary we've seen. Like I think we talked a little bit privately about what the sentiment was when we were reporting last year. Toby, come on the podcast, man. We want to talk to you about this stuff. I do want to note the Globe and Mail story that came out in October of last year, tied to their quarterly financials that day, because it was a really strong story from, I believe, Tim Kilgadze. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Basically like a 3,000 word-ish feature on some of the challenges that Shopify had faced, how they had lost their swagger. I think some of the considerations on the logistics stuff, all the things that we covered. But there were two real problems with that reporting. And I say problems in terms of like problems for the Globe. One, they dropped that story the morning of Shopify's quarterly financials for that quarter, which were stellar numbers. So they kind of had a Shopify lost its swagger story dropped the morning that Shopify was announcing that the swagger had indeed remained. But the framing of the story, the featured image, showed obviously mocked up photo of CEO Toby Lutke with his trademark hat. He's a slightly different hat design than mine. I have a different trademark, kind of drowning in a sea of green, which is like an interesting editorial choice to show the CEO of a company drowning, and one that was not well received by pretty much anyone at the company. Lutke took to social media to tweet this out, basically saying, someone should write a meta story about the tall poppy syndrome. The Globe is just the tip of that spear. It's some kind of cultural autoimmune disease that causes people to post nothing but nonsense about top performers in all fields. And that was a quote tweet on top of another, which we'll share, which showed a side-by-side of Bloomberg's reporting of their quarterly financial results with this Globe story, saying, this is how Shopify is covered differently in the US versus at home in Canada. We have to get rid of our tall poppy syndrome if we hope to ever become a country where the best and brightest come to build. Now, I can give context here and say there was a variety of people at this company who were very upset with this story. I think, again, because it dropped on the day of strong quarterly financials. And I don't think any employee would like to see a photo of their CEO drowning in any sort of business reporting context. I will say, though, that the actual story was incredibly well written and reported and laid out a lot of the components that we've discussed today that have led to exits in certain business units and market layoffs. Rob, I'll turn to you because, again, we're compromised here. Me, because I love the gossip. Madeline, because she has no interest or part to talk about this from a Canadian perspective or like a businesses that she covers perspective. But we've just had, Sean Silkoff, author of Losing the Signal, a Globe Mail report himself about the death of BlackBerry. We just went and saw another screening of the movie earlier this week. the context here is that Canada doesn't know how to celebrate its winners. We are very emotionally tied to the performance of our tall poppies in context with Amazon and what they're doing. And if we don't stop eating our own, we're going to struggle to survive as an ecosystem. I'm wondering, I'm looking to you to maybe give a fair parsing of how this commentary should be taken from, again, what is now the CEO of a company that's been public for 8 years and has been around for 19. Do you really believe that there's a tall poppy syndrome, or some of the reporting or the conversation that we're having is because we just culturally can't get over the fact that we're small and beside the US? Because I know there were other Canadian founders, CEOs. Mike Katchen of Wealthsimple came out and said that, like, this is BS. What's your read? You've run businesses. You help people who have Shopify stores. Yeah. You're not a journalist. What's like?
I clearly will represent the rest of Canada by speaking.
Yes.
The non-journalistic segment of Canada. I would say that, like, okay, I think there's a few things to unpack here. First is that there's a number of factors that are impinging on this. So first of all, absolutely, we have the tall poppy thing. We absolutely like to eat our own. We look at what the joke with Shopify. It's the 10-year overnight success, right? Like, just to even get to be a public company, they're like, I don't know if this is a thing. Yep. Clearly, they're a thing. And so being an entrepreneur is hard enough. Different markets have different shape of what a good entrepreneur looks like and what the risk they're willing to take. And to be that size, you need to take these huge risks where you think you're in the delivery business and then you don't think you're in the delivery business. So absolutely, I think that we have that disease in Canada. We have not overcome it yet because we have not, we're just not, I mean, look at anything is like, it is still the case that if you're a successful business person, if you go into the States, you do something, and then you come back to Canada, you're still viewed somehow as magically more successful than you are if you did the same thing in this country. So that's just,
okay.
Our neighbor, first thing. Second thing, there's been an erosion of trust in journalism and media. And so
that's news to me.
Right, that's because you can't read the news. Nobody reports that news. I'm just kidding. And so I think parsing the fair criticism, like, yeah, maybe the headline choice and the photo choice is not the best to make your point. But there has to be a good balance of, like, hey, why is this the way that it is? And being able to critique a thing without necessarily taking sides, understanding the fact that this is not always up and to the right. This is nobody. And to the analyst's point, I don't think he's necessarily wrong. These people are reading tea leaves and are trying to figure out based on statistics and price to earnings ratio and things didn't make sense, especially in the last decade.
They don't know what they're talking about.
But I think what we should know is that nobody knows what the hell they're doing and nobody knows what the hell they're talking about. The entrepreneur is making it up as they go along. He's never been a public company CEO before of the most successful company in Canada. Just he hasn't done that, nor have the analysts seen this market. So everyone's making it up as we go. And we have to not self-immolate as we go and understand that there is a trade-off between, you don't want just fluff stories about how great you are, because that doesn't help anybody, including you. And you don't need takedowns. Not that I'm saying the Globe was a takedown, but I'm like, like getting that balance right is very, very hard. And so I think all of those things can be true at the same time. And I think we need to be sophisticated enough to keep all of those thoughts in our head at the same time when we're looking at these businesses. So looking at the full picture and not just being like, I read this one thing. I think we have to be media literate as a society and understand what we're seeing, a part of the whole, but not the whole. So I think we need to be fair to a little more empathy on all the sides of the humans here, and not just be like, Shopify's right. This story is right. And these 3 employees who, no, it's a bad example because I'm sure your sources are more numerous than 3 employees, but you're hearing from the employees who are not happy.
Yes.
So that's not to say the story is not valid, but a bunch of people being laid off who have probably never been laid off before because they've never seen an economy where they had to be laid off before, you're going to get crank. So understand the perspective of where these things are coming and have that balance. But I do tend to side with him. I do think we need to stop self-immolating.
I love how we just talked about Shopify for an hour, and then the conclusion of this is like, we need better media literacy. I kind of agree. I think, and it's honestly the reason why we would love to have Toby or even Harley, who's been on the podcast before, come on and talk about this, is to have a conversation about again, we report on Canadian tech and global tech from a Canadian perspective. We are embedded in the ecosystem a little different than other publications. We want to understand and articulate the balance between how hard it is to run a business, how hard it is to be good to your customers, good to your employees, and compete in a market with some of the other things. I agree there's a tall poppy syndrome because we usually only have one or two poppies. I just wish we could have that sophisticated conversation based upon some of the historical examples, because going back to the BlackBerry example, Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsley did not really like talking to the media either. Everyone at BlackBerry felt that everyone was against them, but they were also self-immolating at the same time. I think maybe for everyone listening to this who have heard us track the state of the company, the choices they've made, the successes they've had, and where they're at right now, which is still in a really great place, but at a very different place than 2020, is you have many years of historical examples of what this leadership team cares about. Mm-hmm. And they've only gotten more clear and finely tuned in what they care about and what they don't, and what are problems. So no one should be surprised at this point, whether you're an employee, a former employee, prospective hire, about what they're going to index on. I would just love to have Toby come on the podcast. Come on the podcast and talk about this. Talk about how hard it is as a founder to see, and an employer of tens of thousands of people, to see a photo of you drowning on the coverage of the paper of record in Canada. Because I know that if anyone said something sideways about one of our interns, I would have a knife at their throat. So this must be difficult, but we've got to balance that out with the fair criticism of, unfortunate side quests, which should be a great subtitle of this episode. Katie, take note of this. Madeline, I'm sure you have no interest in weighing in on that, but we will give you the final word. If people want to read more of your stuff, where can they best find you? What other companies in the retail and e-commerce space do you cover, in case they have interest beyond that? Give us a bit of a plug, and we'll thank you once again for coming on and parsing a very interesting company with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. You can find me on Twitter at Madeline L. Stone. Read my stories on insider.com. And I cover lots of companies in the Shopify ecosystem. So if you're a startup or an app owner, I would love to talk to you. Also cover some other e-commerce companies like Etsy and eBay.
Awesome. And then if you feel uncomfortable sending Madeline a DM, you can just send it our way too. No. If you've got thoughts, especially for the video version of this, there's a comment section right below this video. Toby, if you're not going to come on the pod, at least leave a like and a comment below.